Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nagasa from Sanyii Academy. Today I'm going to teach moral and citizenship education, lesson 3 from chapter 2. If you are new for this academy, please start by subscribing and liking. If you are already member to Sanyii Academy, start by liking, commenting, and sharing the video to help others access this video and enjoy the lessons delivered from this academy. You can also use social media links that are just mentioned here through Facebook, through YouTube, Telegram, through LinkedIn, Twitter, and WhatsApp. Channels are prepared just to directly help you access videos uploaded to Sanyii Academy. As I just mentioned, we have already started chapter 2 about theoretical frameworks of ethics. From that, we have seen about normative ethics, and under that category, we are still talking about teleology. So today we are going to talk about utilitarianism, which is another theoretical aspect or theoretical ground in the teleological or consequentialist theory. Utilitarianism is the universal principle of utility or universal principle of hedonism, mostly known as social hedonism. So, what is the central thesis of this utilitarianism? What does it say? What does it present as argument? So, as to just give insight for person to apply the principle, it has already equipped itself with utilitarianism, which is producing the best consequences, say the action is best if it procures or produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. The rightness and wrongness of an action or the moral status of the action is determined by the amount of happiness it produces for the greatest number of people. This is a guiding principle it follows. So it is a universal teleological system that need individuals or the agent of the act to do what is beneficial or what creates happiness for the greatest number of people. It calls for the maximization of goodness in the society, for the goodness of the society, for the benefit of the society. That is the greatest goodness for the greatest number, and not merely the good of the agent. It does not focus on the good of the actor or the agent. Rather, it focuses on the good of the many or the people or the society. So a person has to do the action which produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people, which guides the actor through his or her action, believing that he or she is acting to produce the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people or the society in short. So the actor has to focus on this principle. He or she has to try to maximize the happiness that the society is willing to have or the society required to have. Though this is a principle that guides the actor or the individual agent to produce the greatest number of happiness or pleasure for the greatest number of people. That is a guiding principle. He or she should not focus on his or her own betterment or happiness. Rather, he or she should focus on the happiness of the mass, the happiness of the many. He says this is a guiding principle of this utilitarianism or the whole philosophy of utilitarianism. So, utilitarianism is an old age theoretical framework or an old age philosophical um, framework that we have to appeal to justify the action that we perform according to it. So, from that utilitarian approach, let us come to classic utilitarianism. In our normal lives, basically, we humans use utilitarian reasoning. That means we aspire to have the good than the pain. than something evil. We need to enjoy writing. We need to just enjoy good things. That is why people are striving everywhere to enjoy happiness, pleasure for their own life. That is the guiding principle. As a formal ethical theory, this classic utilitarianism, the seed of utilitarianism were sown by the ancient Greek philosophers Epicurus. He is a figure and the founding father of classic utilitarianism that focuses on the pleasure that produces for the greatest number of people. So, classic utilitarianism is emphasized on the happiness of the people. He stated that pleasure is the goal of that nature has, the goal that nature has ordained for us. It is also the standard by which we judge everything good. We ascribe the value of goodness or rightness, appropriateness to something that satisfies our interest. We focus on that. In order to measure, we say some sort of thing or something is important and good because it is satisfying us. The satisfaction that we obtain from that thing or that action obliges us to ascribe that thing is good. So satisfaction that we obtain from something is the pushing and pulling factor for a person to say that thing is good. So, according to his view, rightness and wrongness are determined by the pleasure or pain that something produces. If we eat some food and then that we are satisfied with that food, we say the food is good because the satisfaction that we derive from that good force us to ascribe that goodness. And sometimes also we may encounter the food that is not properly prepared by a person, and then when having that food and not satisfied with that, we say the food that I ate today is bad or it is not good. The satisfaction that we obtain from that thing or that food forces us to ascribe those things, goodness and badness. So the bad thing is considered as evil or as painful in utilitarianism, and the satisfaction that is preferable, that is satisfying, that is interesting, is preferred or ascribed as good. So the thing we get from that object, the satisfaction we get, or the pain that we feel, force us to determine what sort of action it is. Therefore, the rightness and wrongness of an action of a person is depend on the amount of pleasure that it produces or the amount of pain it produces. Epicurus' theory focused largely on individuals' personal experience of pleasure and pain, and to that extent, he advocated a version of ethical egoism. So, this theory that was developed by Epicurus was mainly emphasized on individual or personal satisfaction. So it shares some sort of characteristics. It shares some sort of just commonness with ethical egoism because ethical egoism, as we have seen, says we have to focus. We or you should do the act that produces the greatest benefit for you. You should look after your own interest. Self interest is the main active here. So we have to emphasize on our own betterment or self-interest according to ethical egoism. So this classic utilitarianism that was perpetrated by Epicurus itself repeated what was previously um, discussed or exhaustively emphasized by ethical egoism. So, according to this, individuals' personal experience of pleasure is a determinant factor that a person has to do to produce that thing. So, classic utilitarianism is the type of utilitarianism that focuses on individual interest. Epicurus inspired a series of 18th century philosophers who emphasized on the notion of general happiness. So, although Epicurus' philosophy emphasized on individual experience of pleasure and pain, this has forced and caused many philosophers in 18th century to look for the act or the philosophical ground for the happiness and pleasure of the mass or general happiness. His notion was pleasing consequence of actions that impact others and do not just the individual. So this has caused many to think that the action or the belief, the act that pleases or produces some sort of satisfaction for other has to be focused than the individual. So this theoretical framework came into existence as a result of repeated focus and discussion by philosophers of 18th century. The classical expression of utilitarianism appeared in the writing of two English philosophers and social reformers, Jeremy Bentham, who was born in 1748 and died in 1832, and George Stuart Mill, who was born in 1806 and died in 1873. So they have also just did the same. They came to repeat what was just previously advocated by Epicurus. And they were non-religious ancestors of the 20th century, secular humanists. They focus on humanism, optimistic about human nature and our ability to solve our problems without the recourse of God. They say humans are capable of solving their own problem without looking help from God or without the support of God. And they simply focus on human sensation and human developmental aspect, human morality. That means they had the moral obligation and sentiment for humans. This has forced them to just come up with a classical utilitarian approach. Let us come to see what their philosophy was, what their argument was under that. Jeremy Bentham is one of the philosophers that we have just mentioned regarding utilitarianism, and his philosophy focuses on quantity of happiness and pleasure that a person obtain or the society obtain over the quality of that happiness. So they were impassioned with the rule-bound character of law and morality in 18th and 19th century Great Britain and tried to make the law serve human needs and interests. The kings of the time were just focusing on rules and using those rules as an impressive and oppressive instrument that were halting the interests of humans or people in Great Britain. Then they came up with the argument that laws were created or the government need to make laws just to serve human interests and feeling or their needs. There are two main features of utilitarianism, both of which were articulated by Jeremy Bentham. His the first version or first feature of this utilitarianism was the consequentialist principle. That means a teleological principle. The end justified the means principle stated that the rightness or wrongness of an act is determined by the goodness or badness of the result that follows from it. So, according to consequential principle of utilitarianism, he say the right and wrongness of an action depends on the product it produces, the result that is obtained from that action. It is the end, not the means that counts. It is not the way you do the action or what sort of action you make, rather the product it produces matters the most in the determining the rightness and wrongness of an action. That the end justifies the means is a basic principle of this Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, which focuses on quantity of pleasure and happiness that was produced by the actor than the quality of the happiness that was just produced as a result of doing that action or as a result of making that action. The end justified the means is the basic content of this Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. The second feature of this utilitarianism is the utility principle, the amount or hedonistic principle. Hedonism basically is a Greek word which means pleasure. So the hedonistic or is the utility principle of this action or feature of this theory stipulates that it states that the only thing that is good in itself is some specific type of state, or for example, pleasure, happiness, or welfare. Utility principle emphasizes the thing that is good in itself and that is desirable is pleasure, happiness, or welfare. These are those things that we have to pursue, that we have to focus on. So those pleasures, those happiness and welfares that we need to obtain as a result of doing that action should be the guiding principle and the parameter that everybody should take into account in order to just maintain their own interests. Hedonistic utilitarianism that we have just mentioned here is the philosophical approach that views pleasure as the sole good and pain as the only evil. Hedonistic utilitarianism considers pleasure is the sole good. What is pleasurable is solely or only the good one. The action that produces happiness is or pleasure is the only good one, and pain is the only evil one. Other than this, there is not that much counting to its own assessment method. So, based on these features and argument, it says an act is right if it either brings about more pleasure than pain or prevent pain, and an act is wrong if it either brings about more pain than pleasure or prevent pleasure from occurring. Pleasure is the parameter and the guiding principle that we should focus, according to Jeremy Bentham, to count our action as good or to make a good and right action. If the act is either bringing more pleasure and bringing more pleasure than pain or preventing pain from happening, that action is morally right and acceptable. But if it does the opposite, if it produces greatest pain over pleasure, or does prevent the good, the pleasure from occurring, then that action is completely wrong. Bentham's invented a scheme for measuring pleasure and pain that he called hedonistic calculus. He had developed a method to ensure a calculation for counting and measuring that happiness. That is called hedonistic calculus. Hedonistic calculus is the method that was developed to calculate the amount of happiness, amount of hedonism that we gather or obtain from doing certain action. That is his way because he focuses on the quantity of pleasure or happiness that is produced as a result of doing that action than focusing on the quality of that action that he does or argues. It is a quantitative score for any pleasure or pain experience is obtained by summing the seven aspects of pleasurable or painful experiences. So, in order to undergo this hedonistic calculus, according to him, we have to focus on seven issues and seven important things. These are intensity. Intensity is we have to look at the intensity of both, whether the intensity, the degree of pleasure that was produced or the degree of pain that was produced. If the degree or the intensity of pleasure that is was produced is higher than the intensity of that pain, then that action is important and desirable, but not enough because there are other six methods remaining. The duration, the continuity, how much that pleasure lasts, how much it lasts. Is it long or short? Depends. If the pleasure lasts for longer, that action is desirable. If the pleasure lasts for short and the pain lasts for long, then it is more. Certain how much that is sure, how much we are sure about, or how much we are certain about that action, about the pleasure that is derived from the action, or how much we are certain about the pain. Nearness, closeness, how much the happiness is near, how much it is near to us or near to the people. Fruitfulness, the product that we have eminently developed. Purity, how much it is pure, and extent, the scope of that action has to be constant. So, adding up, we have to give numbers and the amounts for each seven criteria, seven things or aspects of pleasurable or painful experiences. Then, when we add all this or sum up all this and calculate the amount of pleasure and happiness produced, then we decide the rightness and the wrongness of an action. If the amount of happiness that was produced as a product, as a result of implementing the action is far greater than the amount of pain that was produced, then the action is right. And if it is the opposite, then the action is wrong according to him. Adding up the amount of pleasure and pain for each possible act and then comparing the scores would enable us to decide which act to perform is better. So before starting or putting that action into place, then you have to focus on these principles, seven factors. Then you have to decide which action should be important. There is something appalling about Bentham's utilitarianism, something very interesting is there, because it is simple in its nature and that there is only one principle to apply. The principle that this Bentham's principle or utilitarianism focus is maximize pleasure and minimize suffering. This is what we all need or what we all want in our life. Everyone want to maximize pleasure and minimize suffering or pain. We just need to enjoy good things and minimize bad things. This is the nature of human being. So that is what he's saying based on that. In the common sense, we think that morality really is about reducing suffering and promoting benevolence. We just we need to enjoy everything and reduce the pain that comes. But that is not always possible. There are some other occasions in which something painful is more greater than happiness. For example, if you lost one of your loved ones, you start to suffer. If you lose whatever you have, then start to cry. There are people experiencing suffering in daily life, in their daily life. There are some actions which are beyond our capacity to control. These are maybe beyond our actions, beyond our manipulative authority. Those, for example, if somebody um, is just experiencing painful situation and the result of disease, incurable disease, then that would suffer him a lot. But Bentham's principle is scientific in its nature because it focuses on calculations and mathematical expressions. This is a quantitative measurement and apply principle impartially without just having sides, taking sides, giving no special treatment to ourselves or to anyone else because of race, gender, personal relationship, or religion. These elements are not considered according to him. So a person, the agent, has to focus on impartial making of such judgment before doing the action. So this is what Bentham's argument is. It was to meet the sorts of objections and self-utilitarianism from the church of being a big philosophy. Peak philosophy. Peak philosophy is not that much interested philosophy because peak eat whatever it finds. Pig sleeps, do whatever it wants in unclean places. So pig philosophy is a philosophy that was not focused on reason and rationality, rather on body pleasure. So according to this theory, uh, we have to focus and at least we have to try to be rational in doing those actions. Otherwise, we would be just partial in our actions. If we focus on religion, closeness, and friendship, then it would just make or it would just devalue the consequence of the action that we are just going to do. Bentham's successor, John Stuart Mill, sought to distinguish happiness from a mere sensual pleasure. The pleasure of the senses and happiness are two different things when we come to John Stuart Mill. Pleasure is the bodily happiness or temporary that we obtain as a result of doing. For example, uh, having sex with someone would give you pleasure, sexual pleasure for some point, but it does not continue. Happiness, for example, having knowledge and wisdom is something continuous. It cannot be obtained in simple time or in a short period of time. Rather, it takes time to just produce and develop this kind of understanding. He just tried to distinguish between senses, sensual pleasure, and happiness. His version of theory is often called monastic utilitarianism. That means happiness utilitarianism. Eudaimonia is a Greek for word that represents happiness. So happiness is completely different from pleasure. Pleasure is simply the satisfaction of your body, not your mind or not your soul. His version had just come up with another thinking which focuses on happiness. He defines happiness in terms of certain types of higher order pleasure. He says there are two categories of pleasure, the higher order and lower order pleasure or satisfaction, such as intellectual, aesthetic, social enjoyment, as well as in terms of minimal suffering. So, this focuses higher order pleasure are those intellectual pleasures, aesthetics, just admiring beauty, and social enjoyment or doing some social works and then enjoying yourself. This thing has to also focus on minimizing suffering and evil. As to male, there are two types of pleasures, as we have just mentioned, the lower or elementary, including eating, drinking, sexuality, resting, and sensual titillation, or sensual sensual fantasy. These kind of things are considered to be elementary pleasure. You, for example, you eat, then after some minute or some hour, you lose and you become hungry. So the pleasure is temporary. You have sex with someone, then you forget it. You rest for someone, then you drink sometime, then it passes. So it is temporary in its nature and elementary. So, having said this, let's come to the thinking of George Swartman. Then he focused on quality over quantity. He said the second one is high culture or higher pleasure, which focuses how high culture. That means the culture of hard working, the culture of thinking, the culture of honesty, and others. Scientific knowledge, intellectuality, and creativity. These are higher standard pleasure that we focus on to produce the greatest happiness that we need to enjoy in our life. Although the lower pleasures are more intensely gratifying, that means we are satisfied when we have food, they also lead to pain, which tend to be more long term, continuous, and gradual. Sometimes, for example, the culture, the habit of eating, there are people who eat more and then they become over weighted, and then obesity comes to them. The suffering as a result of just habit of eating more produced a pain that is longer than the pleasure they had. There are so many people killing themselves of obesity because of having eating too much. They eat too much, then they fell into the addiction of eating, and then finally obesity happens. They suffer. I mean, they don't have just the way to perform perfect and regular respiratory systems are stopping their function. They're just exposed to medical problems or they're exposed to health problems, then the suffering is continuous. But the pleasure they have is very short and not long. Mill argued that the higher or the more refined pleasures are superior to the lower ones. Intellectualism, knowledge is more superior than food. Knowledge is more superior than sex. So This is what they say. It is better, just to indicate his own argument more profound and sound, he said, it is better to be human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, or better to be Socrates dissatisfied than full satisfied. This is to indicate how much higher standard pleasures are more important than lower standard pleasures. It is better to see a man dissatisfied, angry man, or the man that is not satisfied than a pig satisfied. That means to indicate how much higher standard knowledge and happiness are very important. Humans are a kind of creature who require more to be truly happy. To be truly happy, we just need to go beyond elementary happiness. We need to think beyond food. We need to think beyond sex. We need to think beyond something elementary. That is why we are created and equipped with reasoning capacity, and mind is given us to think. They want the low pressure, but they also want the deep friendship, intellectual ability, culture, the ability to create and appreciate art, knowledge, and wisdom. Although mostly we depend on elementary pleasure producing things like food, sex, and others, we also want higher standard thinking, higher standard pleasure that are very productive to our future. That is why we see scientific explorations and investigations have come up with something new. Computers we use is space explorations and discovery are the result of higher standard pleasure, although we all depend on the lower standard or elementary pleasures. So we need both of them, he says. The point is not merely that humans wouldn't be satisfied with what satisfies a pig, but that somehow the quality of the higher pleasure is better. The main reason why John Stuart Mill said it is better to human beings dissatisfied than pigs satisfied is not denying the place of food or satisfaction in every creature, just to indicate the quality of the food or the quality of the action that we perform matters the most. Mill is clearly pushing the boundary of the concept of pleasure by emphasizing higher qualities such as knowledge, intelligence, freedom, friendship, love, and health. So he wants to just go beyond the quantity-based thinking of Jeremy Bentham and expand the degree of this thinking further. In fact, one might even say that his litmus test for happiness really has little to do with actual pleasure and more to do with non-hedonic cultivated state of mind. There might be another argument that just his way of thinking of happiness has something little with that, what he says, and also focus on others with actual pleasures and non-hedonic or non-actual, non-pleasurable actions. Having said this, let us come to act and rule utilitarianism. These are also the works of these two great men, but the focuses of these two utilitarian approach, act versus rule, are more of interesting. There are two classical types of utilitarianism, act and rule. Utilitarianism, as the title the topic indicates, in applying the principle of utilitarianism, utility, active utilitarians such as Bentham say that ideally we ought to apply the principle to all of the alternatives open to us at any given moment. So we apply the principle of maximize happiness and minimize suffering to all available alternatives that are open to us. So let us come to have the definition of active utilitarianism. Active utilitarianism argues that an act is right if and only if it results in as much good as any available alternatives. The rightness and wrongness of an action depends on the result or the consequence of the action that is produced as the result of available alternatives, which is most producing alternatives. One practical problem that we see with this act utilitarianism is that we cannot do the necessary calculation to determine which act is the correct one in each case. For often we must act spontaneously and quickly. So it focuses on this. The problem that we have is we cannot measure it because we do it spontaneously and quickly. So any available opportunity that we encounter determines how much that app is good to us or good to the rest. So is it problem or difficult for a man or person to calculate that the amount of the pleasure or happiness that is just came to happen as a result of applying that action in a particular case. So the problem in this. Um, so, rules of the thumb are of practical importance. For example, in general, do not lie and generally keep your promises, but the situation matters. If lying produces an interesting moment for you, you have to do, but generally, we have to follow the principle don't lie or keep your promises. But if there are some situation that is forcing you to break your promises, there is no obstacle that is blocking you from breaking it because as a situation or action, or if the action or the situation produces the best result, then you have to do it. However, the right act is still that alternative that results in the most utility. If breaking the promise by itself produces the greatest utility, then you have the probability to do according to active utilitarianism. How, the second problem that just we see regarding this active utilitarianism is that it seems to fly in the face of the fundamental intuitions about minimally correct behaviors. It revolves our intuition, our senses. It is emphasizing on our senses, or sometimes we focus on some other things, some sort of just things that we cannot control by our senses. So the problem it has is it's flying in the face of fundamental intuition. That means which is beyond the control of our senses. Because when you start to feel something, we have seen in the logic and critical thinking course as a source of knowledge. Intuition is something strange that you experience that is beyond your senses. So it has some problems so that we can just make sure whether the produced act or result is morally appropriate or inappropriate. The alternative to active utilitarianism is called rule utilitarianism, which is elements of which we find in Mill's theory. The advocate of rule utilitarianism is John Stuart Mill. So he has said that an act is right if and only if it is required by the rule that itself is a member of the set of rules whose acceptance would lead to greater utility for the society than any available alternative. So, according to the view of this rule utilitarianism, an action is right if it follows the rule which is already the set of rules that produces the greatest utility for the greatest number of people. An action is not only focused, the focus of this action, according to him, is the rule. The act has to follow the rule, which is already member or set of rules that produces the greatest number of happiness or pleasure or result for the greatest number of people for the society than any other available options. Human beings are rule following creatures, he says. We adhere to rules in a given subject. We adhere to rules in speaking, in language. We adhere to rule in organizations. We adhere to rule everywhere, in churches, in schools, everywhere. So we have to follow on that. So we want to have set of actions guiding rules by which to live. So we have to follow those rules because those rules guides us. Then those rules are good by themselves. So if a person do what is right based on that rules, then the greatest number of pleasure or happiness may be produced for the people. He says that utilitarian rule to do the exact that maximize utility is too general for most purposes. So it's general, the active utilitarianism rule is. But the rule utilitarian rule is more of emphasized on rule that is already the set of good rules that are just produced. Uh, this is all about today's lesson that we have seen about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a theoretical framework or that focuses on the general utilitarian approach, or it is a general teleological approach, and it has two categories: act and rule utilitarianism. It has also two assumptions: agent focused uh, thinking, that says a person has to do that which produces more benefit than loss, or pleasure than pain; and also social hedonism, which says one has to follow the action which produces the greatest number of um, benefit over great number of loss, or good over pain. Act utilitarianism say an act is good if and only if it produces greatest number of good over pain than any other given alternatives. He says rule utilitarianism says the action is right if and only if it follows the rule that is already the set of rules that produces the greatest number of happiness for the greatest number of people. This is what the argument is saying. This is all about today's lesson. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment on this video, and be member to Sanyii Academy. Stay tuned, stay connected. God bless you. Thank you very much. Until next time, bye bye.